Hello everyone and welcome to the Scottish Games Network podcast. This is Andrew speaking and I'm here to introduce the first in what is the new format for the SGN pod. So if you listened to last week's episode, you'll remember that we talked about how we want to focus more on the kind of one-on-one in-depth interviews with people in the Scottish games industry, which we've done a few of before, but they're going to be our focus now going forward. And so this is the first of these, and it comes courtesy of the newest member of the SGN team, Sebastian Mackay. So Seb, who you'll also remember from last week's podcast, is the host of the Scottish Business podcast. And as part of that podcast, he's interviewed a few really interesting, informative people from the Scottish games industry and also some guy called Brian Baglow. But he's kindly agreed to let us rerun those episodes as part of SGN, which is great because they're just fantastic conversations and obviously really relevant to everyone in the Scottish games industry. And this is the first of those episodes. So Seb interviewed Colin Macdonald, who is the commercial director at Rivet Games. Now, Rivet Games are a Stirling-based company, and they work on expansions for the games Train Simulator and Train Sim World. And those kind of expansions include a recent adaptation to Train Sim World 2 based on the Island Line in the Isle of Wight, which is this beautiful kind of coastal route that you can now enjoy in its entirety in Train Sim World 2. Obviously, that's a very niche kind of company, and Colin talks about that in this interview in a very interesting way. And you may also recognise Colin as the main man behind Games Jobs Live, which is basically the place you want to go if you're looking for who's hiring across the UK games industry, and also some helpful info if you are a graduate or someone trying to break into the games industry. He's done some great interviews with people and companies across the UK, so check out that stuff at gamesjobs.live. So without further ado, let's get into it. This is Seb's conversation with Colin Macdonald of Rivet Games.
Hello.
Hey Colin, how you doing?
Not too bad, thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing alright. It's been a weird day, but it's been pretty good.
Well, I think I'm finding most days a little bit weird, but I'm not sure I'll ever get used to that.
Yeah, I feel like the novelty of this certain unspeakable thing has kind of well and truly worn off at this point, right?
Yeah. You kind of go through highs and lows of oh well, we'll just get on with it. Oh Christ, I'm just so bored of it all. But we will get there. We will get there eventually.
You know what's been breaking it up for me really well has been trips through the incredibly scenic island of Tsushima via Ghost of Tsushima. What have you been playing at the moment?
So yeah, that's not been on the list. I've actually not.
It's so good.
Yeah, everyone I know keeps raving about it. I've not actually managed to play much the last month. I did really well the first sort of 6 months of lockdown. I played through so many games I've been meaning to get through for ages. And then I got Cyberpunk in December along with Half the Planet. But I'm on an original PlayStation 4 and it was just so buggy. I've not gone back to it. And it's also stopped me picking anything else up because I kind of feel like I want to play that next, but it's not good enough to play yet. So I'm kind of hoping that I know there's been a bunch of patches. So I'll maybe try and pick it up again because that's kind of things are just busy. But also I'm used. That seems to be my excuse for
yeah, I get that.
Picking anything else up. But no, before that it was great. I was getting through Yakuza and Final Fantasy and
I haven't played Final Fantasy yet.
So I'm not a big RPG person, and I just kind of felt I mean it was partly a professional interest. I'm like, oh crap, I've never played a Final Fantasy. I should get this one, and it was amazing. I mean, it's not exactly my cup of tea, but it was so beautiful. Yeah, I was quite taken with it. I would play the next one. I'm not going to suddenly become a Final Fantasy fan, but yeah. I would happily play more sometimes.
Yeah, I get that.
But yeah, it's the it's the Yakuza games. I've played 2 or 3 of them since lockdown, and somehow they'd never been on my radar before. And they're kind of ridiculous, and they're old-fashioned and sexist and whatever, but they're also just stupid and fun. So they've been good, and I think Tsushima is kind of, also excessively Japanese, but in a more not sedate's the wrong word, but just not as trashy a way. So I need to look at Tsushima as well.
Yeah, Tsushima's, I mean, I've spent a lot of time chasing foxes and golden birds. Generally, I am the kind of guy that will play through side quests. I stayed away from open world for a while. I tried The Witcher, and I was like, there's way too much going on. I'm overwhelmed. So I just played games that were like put me well and truly on the rails, But Tsushima, rather, has been nice. Just like, I can't really go outside. The weather's a bit shit. But it's really beautiful all the time in this game. So it's been doing that. I've always wanted to be a Final Fantasy fan. I feel like I should like it more than I like it. That's my guilty truth. I played Final Fantasy VIII on the PlayStation 1 when they came out. They were like 8 discs. Do you remember that? And oh my god. Yeah. And then I re-downloaded the remastered version, and I was playing it on my Switch, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, this was not what I imagined when I bought remastered. But 7 is definitely on the list. It's just, I'm so far behind when it comes to games, like ridiculously far behind. I've got like we all do, I've got a stack of, this is my next to playlist. And some of them are now going back years. I've got like a Batman game, I've got the Spider-Man game. Dude, Spider-Man is so good. Yeah,
I know. I played it for half an hour. I'm like, okay, right, I'll come back to this. Not yet. I will.
Yeah. The joy for me with Cyberpunk, and I haven't played it, is that it was kind of such a disaster that I can wait for a year and buy it, and it'll be perfect. Yeah. And I feel way less pressure now because of it.
Yeah, my mistake is that I've already bought it, so it's going to just sit
you just put it in a box for a year.
Yeah. I know, but
I mean, it was supposed to be good, right? We weren't to know.
Yeah, well, and I think there's a lot to love about it. So, I mean, to be honest, I can live with a lot of bugs. It was the fact that for me, it crashed every 20 minutes. And that's just going to annoy the hell out of me. So, as long as they sort that, then, the other things about floating heads or whatever it was, fine. I'll play through it living with that a bit.
Yeah, there's this excellent bug in one of the Need for Speed games, and if you hit a wall going fast enough, you just go straight into the abyss, and you just float in the abyss, and things slowly start to dematerialize around you until you're just a driver with a helmet sitting in nothing, and it's fucking fantastic. It's the coolest little thing. Anyway, Colin, thank you so much for coming and hanging out on this episode of the podcast. It's really cool to have you on and to be talking partly about Rivet Games, but also about the whole Scottish industry, which I knew a little bit about before getting here and getting into this, but I'm slowly learning so much more. So thank you.
No, not at all. Great to be here.
So Rivet Games, we talked about this a little bit over email. You do train simulators, very niche. So talk me through that, because I mean, like, the games industry, I think regardless of how you look at it, is huge, right? If we go from Candy Crush to AAAs to like literally everything in between. But what's it like building a niche out for yourself in an industry, doing something like, train simulators and those sort of simulation style games?
I mean, it's like anything. It's got its pros and cons. I've been in the industry about 30 years, and most of that has been spent doing, fairly stereotypical games for your stereotypical audience. And when Rivet Games was set up, it was focused on, it's not making the train simulator game itself. It's even more niche than that. It's just making the additional add-on content. So they'll make additional trains, additional routes. So they'll model like, an 80-kilometer section of Switzerland. So every bridge, every iconic building, every river that you would pass in real life on that route, they'll model all of that. So that you can drive along that and experience, what it's like to drive along that route in real life. And, when you make content like that, it's never going to sell millions of copies. You know, that's always the dream. You make a game, and at the back of your mind going, oh, maybe this can be the next Minecraft. And what's amazing about the industry is that, yes, it's possible. You know, someone could have the next Flappy Bird, someone could have the next Minecraft, you know, because none of those were, in the scheme of things, that big an undertaking when they were originally developed. However, your chances of seeing that level of success, they're not even 1,000,000 to 1. I mean, you know, the games industry is like any other entertainment industry, like, you know, music or books or TV, that it's largely a hit-driven industry. A lot of things lose money, unfortunately, but a lot of us are still motivated by, you know, trying to hit the top of the charts to see that big success. So it's still worthwhile doing in many respects. What Rivet are doing in terms of the train simulator content is something that, like I say, it will never sell millions of copies, but because everything they do is based on something in the real world, it's a real route, it's a real train, there are correspondingly real people that know that have traveled on it, that have an ambition to travel on it. So they will always sell thousands of copies. So it's just an interesting sort of sector within the wider games industry that is just a bit more sustainable, a little bit less exciting, I guess, if you're used to you know, working on games that aspire to be big blockbuster games. But it's also just a bit more predictable, that you can make a train, you know, you'll sell a couple of thousand copies, you know, you'll stay in business, and you know what, that counts for a lot.
How did you come into this niche in particular? Like, are you a train enthusiast, or did you fall into it in a sort of different way? Hey man, I fucking love trains. Like, I was supposed to be in Europe now, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, I fell into it. I'm not a train person at all. I mean, I do love trains. You know, one of my things, I like holidays to weird and exotic places, and one of my things, for no reason I can put a name on, has always been, oh, I got to take a train here, because it's always just a unique experience. So I've been on, you know, trains in Mexico and Cuba and Japan and China and whatever, you know, all sorts of places, Egypt and everything, amazing train journeys. But no, this was a chap called Tim Gatland was one of the guys that set up what's now called Dovetail Games, who make the train simulator games. So Tim's based up here in Scotland, and although Dovetail Games that make Train Simulator ended up being based down in Kent, they kept an office up here that Tim ran, and ultimately ran it for 10 years very successfully. And then a couple of years ago, he basically did a management buyout. So a bunch of the staff that were with Dovetail Games, just based up here, moved over to this new company. So it was the same people doing the same things for the same platform, just under a different brand. You know, it's a different company. So we're now partnered with Dovetail. We're no longer part of them, but we're partnered with them. But because it was a new company, Tim realised he needed a bit of help in a couple of different regards. So while he runs the company, he brought in me as a commercial director and someone else as a development director to help get the business off the ground and just start looking at all the other things that we need to do now that we're an independent company. So I'm learning a bit about trains, but I'm not a train buff, for better or worse.
Yeah, mostly in the, I guess, business side of it, right?
Yeah.
Because we were talking, you mentioned before about the difference between sort of selling thousands of games and selling millions of games. And I think that if you're on the outside of the industry and you're looking at, people still tend to think of it as like something for kids, right? Or something for, you know, that's kind of low value throwaway entertainment, and perhaps not realizing it's the biggest entertainment industry. With its sheer sort of size, does that make it easier to dig out a niche? I mean, I'm thinking in particular, if you look at films, you have art house cinema, but they're only so scalable, right? Whereas games, you've got app stores and all those kinds of things, Steam to get it out there. Like, how much does the scale of the industry help people like you survive?
Oh, massively, yeah. Because if you go back 20 years, I mean, we were pretty much just making stereotypical games for stereotypical gamers. You know, most things had guns, most things had cars. You know, and then for me, the tipping point. There was a couple of tipping points. One was when Nintendo came along with the Wii.
Mm-hmm.
That was, you know, such a dramatic opening of the audience. I mean, you know, you go back to, you know, the PlayStation sort of made gaming cool, you know, the very first PlayStation with Wipeout and everything, and that opened it up. But it wasn't a dramatically different audience. When the Nintendo Wii came along, suddenly, you know, you then had the, you know, from 2-year-olds to 92-year-olds, you know, being actual gamers, you know. And so to me, that was the first sort of pivot point. And then the second was with mobile coming along, that when everyone's got a smartphone in their pocket, you know, and Angry Birds came along 12 years ago or however long it is now. And again, everyone's looking for something to while away a few minutes while they're waiting for a bus or they're on the loo or whatever it is. And that massively broadened the audience. And with a bigger, broader audience, there is just going to be more niches. And these days, instead of, you know, SEO being important on the web, now if you're launching a game, you need to think about your search optimization on the app stores, on the Steam store, even on the, you know, the Nintendo Switch store and everything. You need to be thinking really carefully about what you call your game, what your keywords are, so that your audience, however niche it is, can find you. Because we're now at the point where there's billions of gamers. Doesn't matter what your niche is, there will be people that are interested in what you're doing, but you've still got to work hard to make it possible for them to find you.
Can we dig into that a little bit? Because I mean, I myself don't often think of games having to have SEO positive titles, right? And I understand that works differently for different parts of the industry. If you've got a legacy game like Pokemon, you don't really need it. Final Fantasy, like we were talking about before. But yeah, from an indie level, you know, is there a certain idea of balancing what is going to be good in terms of SEO and how you even begin to have that conversation versus that kind of, I don't want to say artistic integrity and make it sort of sound like more than it is, but being able to call your game what you want to call it?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's getting that balance that's absolutely key. But yeah, I mean, you can make the best game in the world, but if you've made something that's unmarketable and unfindable, even to someone that would otherwise love it, it's not going to sell. You're not going to make enough to do a sequel, to even stay in business. So you absolutely have to get that balance. And I mean, it's an art and a science in itself. That you know, the first time anyone launches a new game on the App Store, they go into the keywords and go, oh, what keywords do I want to rank for? So they put in words like game and fun without thinking, the only point in ranking for a keyword is if you come in the top, 3, 10, something like that. I'm now competing against however many million other games with the words game and fun in them. What are the chances of me being in the top 10? 0. So instead, you've got to go in and go, okay, which keywords am I going to rank for? And it's a case of just getting the balance. One game that it worked really well for me on, I was at Channel 4 for a number of years. I was their games commissioner. So I was looking to commission games around different TV shows. And in 2016, we had a show called Eden, which was about taking people out of mainstream life, dumping them on a remote Scottish island for a year and just seeing how they got on with, you know, sort of starting again was the catchphrase. And this was right after the Brexit vote. So, you know, the thought of getting away from it all and starting again was forefront in everyone's mind. And then just by sheer chance of timing, my game launched just a month or two after the Brexit vote. So I was doing all my it's ASO, App Store Optimization, is kind of the mobile equivalent of SEO. I was doing the ASO and realised that there wasn't a single game out there that used Brexit as a keyword. Like, okay, this fits. I mean, your key, it has to fit the game. You can't just pick a sort of sensationalist word. So this fits. And for about a year, if you put in Brexit game, this game, Eden, was the number one result round the world. So it was relevant, but it was appropriate to the game as well. And this is, in a nutshell, it's kind of the biggest challenge of the industry that we have, and particularly in Scotland, I think we have amazing creative and technical talent that are producing wonderful things. We're not so good at the entrepreneurial side. We're not so good at the selling side. And things like ASO and thinking about how to find your audience, that's where we fall down. We make great games and we struggle to have them sell well. And that ultimately means we don't get to make better games, or we don't even get to make more games. So that's a big challenge.
It's interesting. I started this podcast last year and talked to a lot of different people. One of those people was Russell Dalgleish, who is exec of Exalta and a million other things. But Russell was saying basically the same thing you just said, which is as Scots, Scotland generally isn't that great at sort of marketing itself and getting out there. And it's interesting seeing that theme run across all of Scotland's technology businesses. I mean, how do you think, from a games perspective, we can change that and make things, a bit more well known?
I mean, I think we've got a couple of people that excel at it and are great for everyone else to look up to. Chris van der Kyle is the obvious one. And I think it's really important that people have got someone that they can see, that's how it's done. That's how you sell something. That's how you be positive about opportunities. So I think we need more, figureheads and more people to set an example. But I think we've got to drum it into everyone. I mean, I know when I was a kid, I always felt selling and making money and asking for money, they were like dirty words. It feels like we've got something inherently in us that says, oh no, as long as we build something amazing, then it just deserves to do well. I deserve to make a living out of this. And ideally, yes, but it's just not how things work. And I think we just need to tell ourselves and tell the next generation of developers and entrepreneurs coming through, look, that's not how it works. You need to go out there and sell. It doesn't need to be, sort of grubby, distasteful end of selling. But ultimately, the thing everyone needs to remember is if nobody knows about my game, nobody will buy it.
And I think we often like to think of games as, and this isn't to say that they aren't, but creative pursuits, right? Things that we do because we love building games and playing games. And the business side of it, much like a lot of arts, I suppose, comes much, much later.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is the natural way of doing things. It's easier to figure out how to make great games and then to learn the business side. That's more well established. You do get people come the other way that are great business people that then learn to make games, but that's a harder way to come at it. So we're fairly well positioned, but we've got to accept and then be willing to take the steps to learning those business skills and also just spend the time on it. Most people in this industry, they want to do the creative stuff. They don't want to fill out forms for grants or speak to PR people about marketing plans or to spend hours poring over SEO rankings. I mean, that's not why they got into the industry, but they have to realise it's what will keep them in it.
We've got a long heritage of games in Scotland. I mean, I think the Lemmings was probably one of the first games I knew was a game, if that makes sense, that I was playing. I remember sitting at a friend's computer and playing the Lemmings and then finding out many, many years later that it was a Scottish game. And obviously Grand Theft Auto, Rockstar, which comes up a lot during these conversations. You mentioned Minecraft earlier, and Ruffian was involved with Halo. It's funny, I think, because as a whole, we tend to think of places like Los Angeles as the game like hubs and the game meccas. And if it's very much a sense of like if you want to make it in gaming, you have to go to LA, maybe Seattle, somewhere like that. What makes Scotland so good, other than the shit weather, for making games?
It's a very good point about the weather. I mean, one of the things historically was that the Sinclair Spectrum was made in Dundee. So the story goes that lots of them fell off the back of a lorry leaving the factory, and Dundee ended up with a higher proportion of people with Spectrums and looking for something to do on them. We got one Christmas. I don't think that fell off the back of a lorry, but you were conscious it was made in Dundee, and that I think there is something about that. In the same way that it's important to have people to look up to, that it just makes it feel so much more possible. I know Chris van der Kuyl himself has talked about the reason he got into the games industry was because he was looking up to Dave Jones, who ran DMA Design that made Lemmings, and seeing Dave driving around Dundee in Ferraris, and it made Chris go, "Oh, maybe I can do that as well," and he has by quite some margin. So I think that's having sort of local reminders and that you can do something like that, I think is really important. And I think there's a trade-off with Scots. We do have this slightly introverted personality that stops us being as good at salespeople as perhaps the folk from Seattle or LA, and it means we're putting our attention into the creative and the technical aspects. So arguably we're making better games, but we're not telling the world about it, so we're not getting the credit for it, because the Seattleites, or whatever you call them, are doing a better job of bigging up themselves, so they're getting more of the credit. So there's definitely a trade-off there. But I mean, again, you can force yourself to talk more, to get out there more, go to more conferences, albeit not at the moment. Write more articles, big yourself up more. That's stuff we can learn. People that are just not that creative or not that technical, they've got a far longer and harder journey to try and suddenly become creatively or technically brilliant. So we can do this.
Do you feel like there's maybe a mindset shift too that needs to be overcome or taken, where we look at games and studios as needing to have, say, in-house marketing people? It's something that I've noticed a lot around indie games. They don't tend to have marketing teams, whether they be one person, 3 people, 10 people,
Yeah, and you can see it from their point of view. They're going, oh, but
it's an expense,
we've only got 5 slots, and we've got to make the game, and it's tough. I think you can get by without dedicated marketing people. However, I think you have to take marketing seriously. So I think to do absolutely nothing is a massive mistake, unless you've got someone else lined up behind you, a publisher signed early on, and you know that they'll do the marketing, in which case you can get away with not doing anything. But I still think it's a mistake. And even if you can't afford to have anyone dedicated to marketing, I think the whole of the rest of the team then has to take that on board and do bits of it themselves, and it's quite possible. A lot of it will fall down to the producer or the CEO of the company. But if, as long as they can empower people, then anyone in the team can and should be able to do little bits here and there. People can do talks at conferences. People can produce little snippets of the latest feature that they've designed, and you can put that out on social media. So I think the key thing is they've got to realise that for their game to succeed, they've got to allocate something to marketing. It doesn't have to be money, though. But if it's not money, it has to be time.
Yeah. I want to talk to you a little bit about the publisher relationship, because I think one thing that's been really interesting across all of the entertainment industries, and I was talking to a band about this yesterday, is you can essentially create something, put it out yourself, and you can cut out the publisher, whether that be like a record label, a games publisher, a book publisher, that kind of thing. Being able to do that obviously means that you take on a whole lot of extra risk, you take on a whole lot of extra work, and all of those kinds of things. But do you see the relationship with publishers changing, or is the threshold to get in with a publisher higher than it used to be, with there being, millions of indie studios out there now?
Yeah, it's much higher. I mean, just because the sheer accessibility. I mean, now it's, anyone can make a game, anyone can form a team. It doesn't have to be full time. You don't need an office. You don't need. I mean, back when we were doing design, we needed silicon graphics machines for the artists. I mean, they were $50,000 a pop with a license of, I've forgotten the name of the software, but it was another $20,000. I mean, so that was a high barrier to entry. So if you'd reached that barrier, you were then one of a relatively small number of developers that a publisher could then sign. Mm-hmm. Whereas now people can get a Unity or an Unreal license, work online with a bunch of people across the globe with with virtually no overheads other than their time, and produce something amazing. So the publishers have got to sift through thousands of really promising looking games. So it's harder to get a game signed in many ways, but equally, because those barriers have also come down for publishers, there are more indie publishers. Mm-hmm. They're getting into all these niches that we spoke about earlier, and they're having to compete with each other, so that the terms you typically get from most publishers now are better than they've ever been before, despite it being harder to get signed in some ways. So you are seeing most developers have quite a strong case to be able to keep their own IP, which they never used to be able to do. Revenue shares are much more equitable. Everything's much more transparent. So I think it's improving as an industry, and it's partly this sort of democratization of the tools and the accessibility, and it's also the expansion of the market. The fact that the numbers are going up in terms of the number of players, and it's broadening out. So you've now got publishers that specialize in narrative games and in simulation games and in pixel games and in, so if you've made one of those, you can immediately go to that publisher and you've got a far better chance than just pitching them with whatever concept you come up with that might not be a good fit for them.
It's interesting talking about publishers and that kind of thing, because I think we don't often enough think about games as like an export industry. I was talking to Brian from the Games Network about this for this week's episode, and I was saying in New Zealand our three main industries are like tourism, dairy, and tech. I'm pretty sure it's in that order, and tech will come up and swallow the others over time, but we have much the same cultural challenges, I suppose, as here in Scotland, whereas we don't really like to talk about the stuff that we do that much, even though we're doing some really cool and really popular stuff. In terms of exports and things, there's obviously big international partnerships, but do things like Brexit have a big impact on this industry and how this industry can evolve and, become more, or provide more, rather, economic value to Scotland?
I mean, Brexit... my take on it is that no, it's not had a massive impact to date. I mean, yes, there's impacts. The main one is attracting staff. Now if we want to hire the best talent from Europe, it's suddenly got a lot more difficult in the last couple of weeks. There's other implications around data and things like this. But when most of what we're selling is now digital. If Brexit had happened when the industry was predominantly dealing in physical goods, there's more complications from that. But it's really just that the big AAA games that are published by the massive publishers that are boxed copies these days, the vast majority of what comes out of Scotland, for example, is digital only, and even something like Grand Theft Auto, although that's physical as well, the vast majority of the revenue comes from the digital side of it. So yeah, we'll wait and see, but yeah, certainly Brexit's not, and the same as COVID, neither have had anything like the impact on the games industry as they have on, the fishing industries or whatever else. We've been lucky enough that both our production side's unaffected, because we've always been geared up so we can just go home and work, albeit often for unhealthy reasons, but it's come in handy with COVID. And then the sales side's been unaffected, the demand side, because everyone else is at home and looking for things to play. So with both our production and sales side unaffected, the games industry in Scotland's in great shape at the moment.
It's always weird to say, even though it's true across a lot of the tech industry, that COVID has been good for us. If more people are playing games, the Nintendo Switch sold out everywhere in the world during that first lockdown. It's just one of those things, right? It's obviously horrible, but at the same time,
yeah. Oh yeah, any one of us would if we could, would wind the clock back and not have COVID. But with any change, comes opportunities. Some businesses suffer, some prosper. As it happens, COVID has been good in that respect for the games industry. Although, not equally across the board. The ones that have benefited the most have been the biggest games. They have been the Grand Theft Autos and the Fortnites and the Minecrafts, because that's what people think of. The niche indie games, I think, most people have seen an uplift since COVID, but it's maybe in the order of 10, 20%, not the 100%, 200% that some of the bigger games have seen. But arguably with overheads going down, a bunch of games companies are doing away with their offices, at least temporarily, and sales being even up a little bit. It's a net benefit for the industry.
How do you think we can get the industry to have more of an economic impact? This is kind of a double-barreled question as I say it, and be taken more seriously in Scotland. And I'm thinking about that not in terms of game developers and the work that you do, but in terms of things like we have a massive statue of Walter Scott. We love theatre here, and film and television are sort of the Scotland staples, right? But there's no reason games should be among them. I shouldn't be, rather. So what do you think we need to do to get that over the fence?
Well, we've got lemmings statues in Dundee, don't you?
No, I haven't been to Dundee. I've been stuck inside for the past 12 months.
When you're allowed out, get yourself up to Dundee. There is there's a couple of plinths up the Perth Road in Dundee that have lemmings, little bronze lemmings crawling about all over them. So get yourself up there.
That's amazing.
So yeah, it's great that we've got little things like that. It does come back to the earlier point about us shouting more about our achievements. It's a little bit complicated with Grand Theft Autos, obviously the Scotland's biggest games export. The fact that Rockstar are historically very quiet in terms of talking about the development in Scotland. They don't really engage with the rest of the industry. I think has caused problems from that respect. Everyone thinks of it as a New York product, because that's 100%. Where the headquarters are, So that's a shame, but equally it's their prerogative, it's they can do what they want. It would be nice to see the team in Scotland get more credit for that, and that would certainly help. But I think the rest of us just need to shout more. We need to get out more. We need to talk at more conferences. We need to find reasons to do press releases rather than find reasons not to. And just be proud of what we're doing, and it's just not devote so much time away from the creative and technical side that we start to suffer at those disciplines, but just devote a little bit more away from it, because there's probably an 80-20 rule at play here, where we can do 20% of the effort in terms of that sort of biz dev and promotion, but get 80% of the benefit. So, I think, game company CEOs across the country, if they just go, right, I'll spend a day of my week, 20% on biz dev, promotion, marketing, that's probably 20% more than they're spending at the moment, but they would see a phenomenal increase over the longer term. But equally, they've all got short-term goals and challenges that they're trying to hit. It's not easy. You can't just suddenly magic that extra day out of thin air. But most other industries just have to do it, and we have to accept that as an industry as well.
That's awesome, Colin. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with me. It's been really good.
No, it's been great to be on.
Hello again, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that conversation between Colin Macdonald and our own Sebastian Mackay. If you'd like to keep up with what Colin is up to, you can follow him on Twitter at ScottishColin, and you can find Rivet Games at rivet-games.com. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. It's going to be the first of a few like this from Seb, and then many, let's hope, going forward in the same format. So as always, we'd love to hear what you think. Please let us know what you think. You can do so on Twitter at Scottish Games, or you can go to the website at scottishgames.net and go to the little convenient contact us tab, and you'll find the web form to fill in there. And please give us that sweet feedback we so dearly crave. Another way you could do that, which would be absurdly helpful, would be to rate and review us, especially if you're going to do that on iTunes. Or just share the podcast on to your hundreds and thousands of social media friends that you most certainly have as an esteemed listener of the SGN pod. But for now, that's gonna do us. So speak to you again soon, and in the words of Brian, stay cool and groovy. Bye bye.